Welcome to the Live Long podcast, where your health is your power. My name is Erin Hunter, and I am the senior editor here at Live Long Media. And I'm stoked to be joined today by Dr. Jennifer Buczyner. She is a neurologist at the Atria Institute in Palm Beach, as well as heading the brain health program there with a focus on preventative care. And with expertise in delivering preventative care, we are going to talk about the brain and how we can start to hopefully prevent cognitive decline, neurodegenerative issues, and help everyone live a longer life with better wits about them, a better brain. And so more specifically, we're going to be diving into preventative neurology, learning about what that is, who should benefit from it, some early symptoms of cognitive decline, and most importantly, some of the actionable takeaways you can do at home so that way you can start taking action. So, real quick, if you care about this topic and want to learn more strategies about how to prevent cognitive or how to protect cognitive function and prevent cognitive decline, don't miss the opportunity to come to the Live Long Women's Health Summit in April. We're going to be talking about that and so much more. So use my name, Erin, at checkout and before you get your ticket. So without further ado, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks, Erin. I'm really glad to be here.
So right off the bat, can you give me a strategy that you do on a daily basis for your brain?
Yeah, I get a lot of people making fun of me for this one, but it's really become my thing. The more I learn about preventive brain health, is I have become a perpetual flosser. And it sounds crazy, but there's a lot of literature now on the importance of our oral microbiome and our gut microbiome and how that impacts our brain health. So that was one thing I was not doing before I worked here, and now really it's something I've taken to heart.
I wrote a newsletter article about flossing for cognitive health a few months
Mhm.
ago, and I've been flossing every day since as well
There you go.
because but I had no idea. Like the link between that is surprising. I think most people
Yeah.
would be confused that your mouth impacts your brain in such a way.
hmm
Is it because of inflammation?
Yeah, so the thought is it promotes the accumulation of amyloid plaque in the brain. So having a bacteria like P. gingivalis would be the most common one, which many of us harbor. Some of it is genetic. We can't all control it. But if you're predisposed to that and you're walking around with lots of that in your mouth, it certainly can contribute to the development of plaque associated with Alzheimer's.
That's crazy. And that's
Yeah,
it's an actionable thing. People like all you do is take 20 seconds to boop boop boop.
simple. Yeah, super
Simple.
simple.
Simple does it. What's not so simple is understanding dementia and understanding Alzheimer's and cognitive decline. So before we even get into the meat of it, can you just kind of tell me what you do as a preventative neurologist?
Mhm. So, as a preventive neurologist, my goal is to start talking to people in their 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and even into their 70s while they're normal. Before anyone develops any cognitive decline. And our goals are really to identify genetic risk that someone might have, that I'm sure we'll get into, and then also tell the story that genes are just one part of the story. And there's so much we can do with lifestyle and risk factor modification. And that's really the huge part of the story that until recently was not known in neurology.
Is it similar to what folks have said where uh 20% genetics, 80% lifestyle? Does that seem an accurate ratio when it
Yeah,
comes to the brain?
100%. And I would say, when I was in medical school, this was not at all the practice. It was sort of like, neurology historically is known in this specialty where we diagnose and adios. That's what people call us. So I would make a diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease and say to the family, oh, good luck. I'm really sorry. Your family member is going to continue to decline. And, as a physician, that's horrible to watch that. And so what's really been identified in the last 5, 10, 20 years in neurology is, wow, there's so much we can do to prevent dementia. In fact, the Lancet, which is one of our huge, a huge journal in neurology, published an article that 45% of dementia is preventable with modifying 14 risk factors.
And what are some of those risk factors?
So probably the more common ones that we can really fix, one would be hearing loss is probably one of the easiest ones that we can modify. Other things like activity level, diabetes, staying on top of your blood pressure. I mean, these are common sense medical things that we all know, but really aren't following. Exercising, another one being socializing. So the importance of socializing and not being isolated. So if you think anything you're doing where you're sitting on your couch, that's really going to propagate your risk for dementia. But if you're moving and socializing, that will really reduce your risk.
That is epic. That is because it's not groundbreaking, but it's in my mind the idea of sitting on the couch like that paints such a vivid picture in my mind.
Yeah.
So anytime you have that urge and you just want to like forget the world, maybe that's a take a second to double take and say, is there something else I could be doing first?
Right, exactly.
Wow. So you see people in their earliest 30s, though?
hmm hmm Yeah, so if you think about it, I think if you were to ask people on the street and say, what scares you the most about getting older, you would be surprised the number of people who say developing dementia is their biggest fear in life. And we know that 1 in 10 people by the age of 85 is going to get dementia. That's a pretty big number. And if you carry that genetic risk, that number is going to go up even higher. So if I can see someone in their 30s, 40s, 50s who's scared or has a family history, there are so many things I can do to change that trajectory that 10 years ago we didn't even know about.
What is the genetic risk? Like what's it called? The
Yeah, so the
markers.
most common gene that we associate with the development of Alzheimer's would be ApoE4 being the most common. So we each get two copies of this, one copy from each parent. And we have three different variants. We have a 2, we have a 3, and we have a 4. And this ApoE is associated with lipid metabolism and carrying cholesterol through our brain. And we know that if you get one copy of E4 or two copies of E4, your risk of developing dementia, specifically Alzheimer's, goes up significantly. But just like we were talking about with the genetics and then lifestyle modification, that gene is not our destiny. Just because you carry it does not mean you will definitely get Alzheimer's. So it will increase your risk. But again, knowing this, we may make changes to how someone lives their life and what interventions or what modifications we can make to reduce that risk.
Mm. I can imagine there's a lot of fear, right?
There
Like when
is.
you find out, uh, and especially beforehand, before things like preventative neurology existed, it feels like you're writing your, um,
Yeah, your death sentence, pretty
yeah.
much. Yeah.
And that's, oh, you go.
Oh, I was just going to say there was a time where we did not check this because I really had nothing to say to people, right? So it was kind of like, as you said, why would I want to know if my risk was increased? If there was nothing I could do about it, it's just kind of like, let's wait and see what happens. But we now know there is so much, and this is just one piece of the puzzle.
Another piece of the puzzle I think that's really, really highly debated is diet. What is your stance on diet, and what do we get wrong about how to properly eat for brain health?
So the biggest diet that we support would be the mind diet. So like a Mediterranean diet, so low carbs, good proteins, those types of things. And what I would tell you is it is very beneficial. Specifically, if you carry any of those ApoE4, we know it's really beneficial. But additionally, it's not diet alone, it's not exercise alone. But when you look at studies, when you put all these things together, you are just creating a perfect recipe to really, ward off any insulin resistance and inflammation. And we know that that's what is really contributing to the development of Alzheimer's plaques.
So that the insulin resistance and the inflammation,
Mhm.
how does it work in the brain? What does it tell the brain, and why does the brain respond by shutting off its circuitry?
So we know if you have insulin resistance, you're probably potentially going to be overweight and have a lot of visceral fat and things like that. And this increases things like free radicals or scavengers in your blood, and it promotes plaque buildup in your brain. So we know that if we allow these things to go forward, for example, someone with diabetes with an uncontrolled blood sugar has a much higher rate of developing dementia in their lifetime than someone who has totally normal blood sugar. So we've known this for years. It just hasn't been in practice to think about the people who have prediabetes or that they're starting to show signs, but maybe they're not diabetic.
So, on as you mentioned diabetes, GLP-1s, are you like on the bandwagon for GLP-1s?
I am
And
totally on the bandwagon. Totally
okay,
on the bandwagon. So,
because
the other name for Alzheimer's for a while, they were calling it type 3 diabetes. So there was this thought that that was really promoting a lot of the plaques. And what we find, even though there was a major study that was published by one of the big pharmaceutical companies, Novo Nordisk, in December, we were waiting for this trial for a while because they were looking at GLP-1s in the use in dementia. But I will say in that study, it turned out that it was a negative study, meaning that it didn't reach its primary endpoint, which was disappointing to a lot of us. But in that study, the devil was in the details. They used an oral semaglutide, and we use injectables in real life. And the primary endpoint they were looking at in that study was specifically looking at something we use in research, not in real life. So, in real life, what we see is that if I were to check someone's amyloid and tau buildup, the two proteins we can measure in your blood that lead to a development of Alzheimer's disease, I would see those drop with the addition of a GLP-1 at an effective dose.
so in a nutshell, the you could someone who's on the path of Alzheimer's or dementia and they get started on a GLP-1, it could significantly slow the progression because you're seeing this drug literally preventing those buildups from happening more.
Yes, correct. So I don't use that solely in isolation.
Hmm.
But if you now think about that person where we have evaluated their genetic risk, and now we are looking at all of their medical history and everything we can do to optimize their risk, reduce their insulin resistance, reduce the inflammation in their brain, encourage them to be active, fix their diet, we have just really changed that trajectory of their development.
Wow. Okay. That's pretty fantastic.
Yeah.
And it seems more than relevant nowadays because you read all these studies that the projections are saying dementia is going to go up exponentially within the next 20, 30 years. Like, I don't remember what the projection is, but millions and millions by
Yeah.
2060, I think. And it feels demoralizing because a lot of the stuff we talk about here at Live Long and this healthy stuff, it's being shown to prevent, at least hold off, even if someone could develop, cognitive decline. But yet somehow, the more knowledge we get, the more cases are still rising. So that
Mhm.
confuses me, I guess.
Yeah, so I think as you said at the very beginning, you told me you're not that familiar with preventive neurology. So I would say as a specialty, we are like way far behind the trend. Preventive cardiology started 20, 30 years ago. And it's only been in the last 5 years that we're realizing, wow, there is so much that we can do. One of my colleagues, Richard Isaacson, this has been his life career of studying preventive neurology. But as a specialty, this has not been out that long. So it takes a while for these things to become mainstream, for people to realize that. Like I said, it was only a couple years ago that people are saying, why would I want to know my ApoE status? That's not really going to help me. But again, now we have all these modifiable risk factors and we have studies that show us how to help the person who has a genetic risk. So we're in a totally different place, but this specialty is really just starting to really make a dent. And I think as a society, we're all starting to care more, not just about lifespan, but health span, right? So I think that's really been a change.
The quality of life and the idea that I want good health for as long as possible.
Right,
And that means having your mind and your identity and your sense of self with you throughout that lifetime.
right.
Is is resistance versus cardio training better for your brain? Because there's a lot of debate too whether um, one has a bigger impact. And now I know you're supposed to do both, but what has the literature been showing?
Yeah, so from a brain health standpoint, they're all important, okay? And not only to mention that we need, cardiac wellness for our metabolic health, We need resistance training for our bone health, but also for women hormonally, it really benefits us. But I also want to add, we need cognitive exercise, right? So that's the other aspect of this from an exercise standpoint. And the last thing would be balance exercise. There's a lot of literature on fall preventions and progressive balance decline and that association with dementia. So there's not just one, it's not one size for everybody. For example, if you have two copies of ApoE, there's evidence that two times hit exercises a week. We need two 20-minute sessions to really optimize the exercise for you. That's different than someone that doesn't have ApoE. You might be fine in a low level walking, jogging, something like that, and lifting weights 2 or 3 times a week.
How do you know if you're within the hit threshold? Like, is it a heart rate thing where your heart goes up to a certain uh,
Yeah.
percent?
Yeah, so there's a threshold for that, and there's also, all kinds of exercises you can follow that will basically tell you how to get up into that intensity for 20 to 30 seconds. And when we're talking about ApoE and hit exercises, it's like a 20-minute session, maybe 4 or 5 intervals of 30 seconds mixed with, regular intervals of 1 to 2 minutes of low quality activity. It's really not a lot, but it gives you a big bang for your buck.
Wow. And then the other thing you mentioned that gives a bang for your buck, the cognitive exercises. I'm going to assume that you read the study recently where they compared memory training, processing speed, and strategic thinking, and a
Yes.
certain brain exercise literally reduced dementia risk by 25%.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah, so there's a lot of literature on this. And so I think the thought being that if you do something and you do it regularly and you start it early, I think that study looked at people maybe in their 30s to 50s or so. And so if you get on something routinely and do it, we know that that cognitive activity you're doing will significantly reduce the risk of developing dementia because you're exercising your brain. So it's really important to do that. Similarly, socializing, doing puzzles, those kinds of activities are really important for your brain. It helps us develop neuroplasticity to create new neural networks, but it keeps you sharp. It really does.
in the study though, the exercise that I guess triumphed in this case was for processing speed, which maybe you can elaborate on what that looks like. Why would processing speed and doing this specific type of brain training have more of an impact than training your memory specifically to remember more things?
Yeah. So in that article, it's funny because there's a link to one example that we have. And so one that we use in practice is something called Brain HQ, which uses some of these activities you're talking about. And the games are actually pretty hard. I don't know if you've done them, but they kind of have, and there's a free one available online. You should put up the link if you can. But they have you doing two tasks. So you have to remember which car is signaled and maybe a street sign. And so in doing that, it actually is an adaptive task, meaning if you become super fast at it, it is going to change and force your brain to come up with different patterns and different ways to do it and remember. So again, it's this idea of promoting neuroplasticity and challenging your brain. So it forces your brain to utilize different networks as opposed to just a rote memory, which really does not build or change. You're kind of inherently expected to practice that in a certain way, but this forces you to learn and learn different techniques.
So, and this idea of neuroplasticity, can we get into that for a quick second? You want your brain to be able to think differently and create these new pathways because beyond being able to think better, what does that actually physiologically do?
So think about it this way. When someone has a stroke, for example, and part of your brain tissue dies, let's say I can't use my right arm or something. The part of my brain that controls my right arm in the left side of my brain has to create new networks. Okay. So new ways to reteach my arm how to move. Essentially, that's the concept of neuroplasticity. So can I come up with other networks to represent that same area of my brain and teach it different skills? Because the more ways I have that can represent it, the more I'm not going to lose it because I have so many different parts of my brain that are working on the same skill set.
Wow. Okay. That seems really significant
Yeah.
as you age when things start to slow down. But if you can keep your cognitive function up and if you can keep yourself adapting, then your body, I feel like your body would also respond more positively. You'd be able to continue moving more. You'd be able to continue being independent, making good choices, being able to do all the things you've always loved.
Yeah, 100%. And we see this as well in two big studies that we have in the preventive space that kind of prove exactly what we're thinking. So there's one called the finger trial, and there's another one that was performed in the US called the pointer trial. And what these found is that basically, if you, a multi-domain approach is what prevents dementia. So again, not just, fixing diabetes or not just this, it's lifestyle, diet, exercise, cognitive activities, socializing, making sure someone's mood is great. So all of these pieces together, it's not just one thing alone, it's the whole puzzle. And we call that now precision medicine. So we're able to take a look at someone's genes, someone's medical history, someone's day-to-day habits and activities, and we create a precision plan for them.
So, taking those principles and then someone new who's listening to this, they want to start making changes now, but you hear these words like, oh, socialize more, eat clean, like they're all really broad. Are there
Yeah.
any tangible things people can take away that will improve their ability to socialize or improve their ability to think about how to work out? Like, a little bit more of the nuances that are still part of lifestyle, but more applicable to the individual.
Yeah. So I would say mind diet. It's super easy. Look it up. If you start ascribing to that diet, you are following every single recommendation from every major medical institution on dementia prevention. That's an easy one to look up and really start following. And if something is processed, it's probably really not good for any of us, From a movement standpoint, just find a balance. It doesn't take much. It takes 20 minutes, 30 minutes of exercise. Do 1 to 2 days of weights, 1 to 2 days of cardio. Start there and work on a little bit of balance. From a cognitive standpoint, if you really, the study you mentioned, I think they did like 150 minutes of cognitive exercise. That's a lot, particularly if you have somebody in their 30s, 40s, 50s who's still working. You know, I would say start small. 10, 20 minutes, 1 or 2 times a week is really enough to make a dent. And the socializing aspect, I can't underestimate how important that is. I see a lot of this in my practice when people retire. There's just so much loss of socializing in some people that again, if you're thinking about sitting on your couch, that's probably the exact opposite of anything we should be doing. So get up and move, get up and socialize. These are great activities for your brain, and think of that as an activity or exercise. And last thing I would say is, mood. So if your mood is not great, none of these things are going to work. And I can't tell you enough on how much I see that present in my practice as someone complaining of memory impairment, and it turns out they're depressed or they're upset or there's stress or anxiety. So that's really important as well.
That mood part, that's fantastic. I'm really, really happy you mentioned that
Yeah.
because it's a morale thing as well. To take care of yourself, you have to have self-esteem. You have to have good
Right.
morale. You have to have a good outlook on the
Right.
world, which sometimes can be tough. And as you mentioned, among retirees, that loss of what you had been doing for daily purpose might impact that.
Right. And these things are all related. So if your mood is poor, you don't move, you don't eat well, and then you don't sleep well. And then your sleep deprivation contributes to your cognitive impairment. So all of these things are related, and you can't have one without the other. But if you get them all together, the results are exponential.
So, last thing, what's the most underappreciated healthy aging, healthy brain lifestyle advice you've ever been given?
Ooh, that's a great question. So I'm not going to use the flossing example again because we already know that I've ascribed to that one. I would say I was told that all of us should be sleeping and putting it on our calendar just like we protect our calendar during our workday. And I think that is a great tip because as we age or life happens, we become lazy, we get on our phone before bedtime, we don't sleep as well, and we don't really treat it like this is your body's period to rest. We also know that poor sleep increases your risk of dementia. I think just 3 nights of poor sleep a week increases your dementia risk significantly. And if we don't sleep well, we're also contributing to the buildup of those Alzheimer's plaques. So I can't say how important that really is to our overall well-being and lifestyle.
Wow, really fabulous. I've never heard it put like that. Putting sleep in your calendar.
Yeah.
That's really fascinating. I enjoy
Yeah.
that a
It
lot.
should be protected. It should be a protected time where we are not interrupted.
Hey, right on. I couldn't agree with you more.
Yeah.
Um, that's Oh my God, amazing conversation.
Yeah.
I came away with so much I think everyone did here, and the most exciting part about it all is that you can start now. It doesn't take a big, huge effort. It's just the
Yeah.
little things, they compound together.
100%. And I think the big thing is learning your risk and knowing your risk and seeing someone who can help you come up with a plan to reduce your risk. Again, genetics are not our destiny. So we just have to have the information and understand how to make that change.
Awesome. Oh my gosh, awesome. All right, well, thank you so much,
Thank
Dr. Bushner,
you.
for
All
coming on.
right.
This was a real
Have a great
pleasure.
one. Thank you.
Thanks.